Hi, Troy here with Lithogen. This is going to be a training video for one of our customers who ordered an EM31 and EM38 but has never used either instrument before. Now I'm going to leave the customer nameless in this video so I can post it on YouTube later to see if it's useful for anyone else. Anyway, I'm going to do this video in one take as though this was an in-person training session with the customer, and hopefully that will go smoothly, but there could be some hiccups. Anyway, without further ado, here we go. This is the EM31 and EM38 that we will be sending this customer. I have pre-configured everything for the customer, so it should be fairly turnkey. But nevertheless, when you first open the box, there's a lot of stuff to look at, and it could be overwhelming. Now, the device on the right, the EM38, is the orange one. It sees a little bit shallower than the EM31 on the left. Now, the EM31 requires some assembly, and we're going to deal with that one second because the EM38 is easier to demonstrate. First thing to note is that you will need some batteries. Now, the EM38 comes with an optional rechargeable external battery pack, which we have in the box, and that is this battery pack and charger. But that battery pack has a cable that connects it to the device when it sits on the battery pack sits on your hip. So if you don't want to get that cable snagged on things, and some people don't want to bother, the option is to run the entire instrument off of 9-volt batteries. And there's a battery compartment in here, and they're just thumb screws. If they get a little bit tight, you might have to use a screwdriver, pocket knife. And you kind of wiggle it out, and you'll find 9-volt battery. Now, it will ship with one 9-volt and one spare fresh battery that I will put in the case for you. And generally speaking, tape up the ends of the batteries when you're not in use, because particularly with 9-volt batteries, you can actually short them out against something metal and cause a spark or a fire. So that battery is fresh even though it's taped up in the bag there. So once the batteries are installed, the device is ready to use. You could add the external battery pack, and if you do that, there is a connection here between the external battery and the device. Now, this connection here is it's kind of a slip connection. If you pull up on it, and it's hard to see if the camera's focusing. Okay, if you pull up on it, you can see how that sheath moves. So when you make this connection, there's only one way you can do it. It will only click in one direction, and then it's snug. If you pull on this, it's not going anywhere. But if you want to undo it, you have to pull on the sheath, and then it actually releases. Now there's a second plug on here, and that is this cable, which is the old school serial cable. And if you were using a data logger of your own choice, it had a serial port on it. That's how you would connect it. Now this cable is in the box, but you probably won't need to use it. So I'm just going to leave it in there in case for some reason there's some failure in the data logger, or you guys are using a different data logger, or come up with a different solution. Alright. In terms of like actually turning on the device, if you don't have a data logger, you can just actually turn it on and read the values off the screen here. Obviously, you're going to have to write down a lot of values that way, so you want to have a computer or something logging data for you. But let's look at what our computer is. Now, the data logger that we're shipping you will be in the EM31 case. And it's a combination of data logger here, which is basically a Windows computer, and the Geode GPS. Now, the Geode GPS is a superior GPS antenna to the one that's built into the data logger. The one that's built into the data logger will probably get you plus or minus 3 meters, but this one will fairly reliably get you 30 centimeter accuracy, unless you're I don't know, surrounded by buildings on all sides or something like that. Now, the reason it's shipping in here is it's a little bit easier to protect the screen and stuff in this box. When the lid goes on, it's a soft lid, and there's nothing that's really moving around in this box. Whereas putting it in there means it might bounce around a bit. There is a pin here that you can pull up and then turn sideways to lock it up. And if you lock it up, you can easily slide. I'm running up against the wall of the case here. Easily slide the data logger out. The GPS, now I'm going to try to stick my phone underneath here so you can see. GPS has a screw on the bottom, a thumb screw, that you can reach underneath and unscrew. So that was the thumb screw. And we're just going to make sure we don't lose it. Those thumb screws are a couple bucks, so you don't want to lose them. Inside the EM38 case is this orange geode attachment hardware. Someone at Geonics has impeccable writing. And this hardware allows these two to attach to each other in a usable way. You can see there are a couple of screws and things, and they're all thumb screws, so you can do this in the field unless it's minus 40 and your mitts are too bulky. So it just lines up here, and I'm going to try to do this with one hand while I'm holding the phone. And just tighten to, now tight as far as thumb screws goes. You don't necessarily need to torque on it with a screwdriver or something. And once that's on there, that's actually quite snug. And you can see there's a bit of a rubber bumper on the front and stuff, so it's quite firmly in place. The GPS has a plug on one side, which means it can only go on in one direction. Now, the annoying thing about this is that the power button on the GPS is going to be facing the device. So before you connect the screws, actually turn the GPS on. Otherwise, you'll just have to unscrew it every time you want to hit that power button. So once it lines up, you'll have to use a washer to make this snug. A couple of washers in the bag. And just tighten to thumb tightens. And you can see now that we are conveniently holdable with one hand. When you're using the EM31, they will be instead mounted on the device in that tray. Try not to lose the bag. The bag helps keep the screws and mounting hardware in place. And we'll toss the bag back in the box. Now, we're going to grab the EM38 out of the box. Bring it over here. And the GPS is already on. We're going to turn the EM38 on to QP mode. And you can see if the battery is not dead, that it will start putting some numbers up on the screen. Now, these are the numbers that are actually going to be the data that you're logging. But for the time being, we're just going to ignore them and say numbers on screen is good. If you turn on the data logger, it is a Windows computer. So depending on whether it was sleeping or totally off, it will power up and you can sign in. On the desktop of this Windows computer, you'll see two logging programs. There's an EM31 logging program and an EM38 logging program. Because we're using the EM38 right now, we'll select the EM38 logging program. Now, everything should be pre-configured for you, and this includes all of these options here in the menu. The COM ports here might change if you disconnect and reconnect the Bluetooth connections between the GPS or the EM38. But as long as you're not doing things like connecting Bluetooth speakers or headphones or other things to here, these numbers actually shouldn't change. Once in this program, you can go through a number of different setup options. We're not going to go through them now, but I'm just going to click through them so you can actually see, it's like different settings you can make for the GPS. If you were using the device internal GPS here, you would change that to a different COM port, probably COM7 and a baud rate of 9600, but we're using the external GPS, so we have to have it set here. Assuming everything is set up and how you like it, and everything's pre-configured, so we don't have to change anything. One of the things you might want to change is the update rate, and that's how many readings it takes per second. We have it at 5 Hertz right now. 5 Hertz means 5 readings per second. As you're walking along, if you were walking at 5 meters per second, which is really quite like a jog, it would be taking 1 reading every meter. If you're walking slower than that, obviously the separation between readings gets smaller the slower you walk. I'll just leave it at 5 Hertz because there's no reason to change it. If you click the logging button, sometimes there's a pause here while it goes through and initializes all the GPS ports and stuff. And you will start to see a bunch of data on your screen. Now this will tell you right here if your GPS is working. So we have 13 satellites. There's latitude and longitude that it's storing. Then the EM38 itself is sending data via Bluetooth, and you can see how fast it's sending because those numbers are changing really rapidly. But it's only logging a number every 1/5 of a second because we set our data recording rate at 5 Hertz. So there's actually 4 readings coming in from the EM38, although it only displayed 2 on the screen. And this is because the EM38 hardware used to only give 2 readings, and the hardware, the screens have never been updated, but it's actually streaming more data out because this has been upgraded internally. So now there are a couple of things we can go through here. One of the things is calibrate and delete calibration. We don't have the monopod available. The monopod is a pole which allows the EM38 to be suspended in the middle of the air away from all things. So we're going to have to do this without the monopod. The monopod is out with another client. I'm just going to have a quick... So this could be interesting. I only have 2 hands. So we're going to take the EM38 outside. All right, so now normally when you choose create calibration, I'm going to have to put this data logger down so that I have the other hand available. It will ask you to put it on the monopod in vertical orientation mode. So it's hard to see here, but this is like suspended up in the air by like about 1 meter, maybe 2. If you put it up in vertical orientation mode, far away from everything around you, and then press OK on the screen, it will create a calibration data point. And so we're just going to press, I'm going to do that and then press OK, and I will be right back. Now it wants me to rotate to horizontal mode within 60 seconds. Might require a second hand. On the screen there was a little message that popped up that said, calibration completed successfully. So I'm just going to bring this in here, and because I only have one hand, go out and grab EM38 and bring it back. Alright, so we are calibrated, and the next thing we want to do is we're ready to survey. So we want to create a data file. Cancel, we already calibrated. Data file. And because this is a Windows computer, it will want to put things in the documents folder. And it names the files based on the date and the time. So it is 10:08 is October 8th, 11 a.m. If you create multiple files within the same hour, it'll go A, B, C, and so forth. And you can just hit save with the default name if you're happy with that. Later you can just copy those data files out with a thumb drive, which you can put at the bottom. Here, there's a USB port. Just copy them from the documents folder to the thumb drive, and you're ready to process them on the computer, or email them to someone who is processing. So we're going to hit go, log data here, and then I'm going to walk around with the EM38 a little bit. And this is going to be difficult to demonstrate with only this number of hands, but we're going to do it anyway. So the first thing you'll notice is that it starts beeping. And there's a couple of lines on the screen, and this is data coming in. So if we grab the EM38, I have rebar in my floor here, right? So it should be pretty conductive, and there should be all kinds of crazy responses. It's moving all over the place. So we're going to go for a little walk and see how it changes. Now we're outside and there's rebar in here, and it's going crazy all over the place because the rebar is responding. But as we transition from the rebar pad to the non-rebar pad, it quiets down. There's no rebar in here, so suddenly you're just seeing a very flat signal. And as we cross a crack here in the concrete, we're going to go back into rebar, and you're going to see it go mad again. Yeah. In soil, so front yard here, it's nice and quiet, but I have a water line here, which has a metal cap, and let's see what happens when I go close to the metal cap. Yeah, you can see it spike right there, and then as I go past the metal cap, it goes back down to normal. When you're done, just press pause, and then you can press exit. Confirm exit, yes. Okay, that's terrible. That's terrible filming. one day I'm going to invest in a professional rig. So that's all done, and you can simply copy the files out using the file manager when you plug the USB stick in. So I'm going to exit the EM38 program. We're going to walk back to the garage, turn everything off, and switch to the EM31. Now the EM38 is really sensitive to things that are in the very top of the soil. And so in the case of concrete here, rebar is something that's going to light it up like crazy. But if you had like a saline spill or a pile of fertilizer or something like that, you would actually probably pick it up quite well if it's near the surface with the EM38. Now if you're looking at clay that's 2 meters down, you're not going to see it, and that's going to be a problem. Okay, so we're just going to turn this off to save the battery. And there's a little bit of moisture on the device. The devices are water resistant but not waterproof. Don't recommend submerging them. And if you put them into the case wet like this, I prefer that if you let the case air out at night so that there's no mold or anything growing in the case. Going back to this here, we're just going to take apart the setup here so that we can transfer it onto the EM31 in a second. So we're just going to put the device to sleep. So in the corner here, there's an option to power sleep, and that will save some battery. Thumb screws on the back. Obviously, if you're doing this in the middle of the forest or a farmer's field, using those screws is a lot easier. Please try not to. They're a little bit expensive and kind of specialist. Part of the reason for asking for credit card authorization forms before rental is to replace things like screws if they go missing, or for example the stylus. So the geode is currently on still, and we're just going to turn it off here so that we start with a blank slate when we're dealing with the EM31. And that means installing it. So now there's a lot of stuff in the EM31 case. And a bag full of manuals and things, and if you want to read the manuals, there's calibration procedures and stuff there. There is a soft case here. This is full of the chargers and cables that come with the EM31. The chargers also include the chargers for the geode and the data logger, so they're all in here. The EM31 runs off of C-cell batteries. Now there are C-cell batteries in there right now, but they are, you probably go through a pack like this every 6 hours. So we have one pack in there just in case you need some help getting set up on the first day, but you'll need to buy some C-cell batteries. There is no option for an external rechargeable battery pack on the EM31. There's a couple of different straps and things in here, and pads, and we're going to lift this out of here, and this can be fun while using the phone. Alright. Didn't drop it on my toes or anything. So first things first, while the lid is on, there are these rubber bumpers here, and these rubber bumpers exist so that you can turn the whole thing upside down while setting up the device. And the reason you need to do that is because there's a giant thumb screw on the bottom, which is holding these extra booms into place. And this thumb screw is sometimes very... sometimes it doesn't want to cooperate. So now we took the two booms off, and they're just there for shipping. Now you want to put this back on because it has the rubber bumpers and stuff, so you need to set the EM31 down later. It makes it much easier to set it down. And if I was a good video editor, I would speed this part up. I guess this makes it more realistic to what you would encounter in the field, except you'd have two hands available. Alright, now we can flip this back over, and the lid actually is removable. Once the lid is open, you can walk it off of its hinges in one direction and set it aside. I usually put it in the box so that I don't forget it somewhere, because that lid is also expensive. Now we're going to do a little bit of setup here, which means I'm going to have to set down my phone so I can use two hands. So hopefully that this is all making sense, but basically there's these clamps on either ends. They're color coded, and you'll see on the booms that you pulled out of the box that there's also color coding there, but also there's only one way you can install them, so you can't get it wrong. Don't try to force it. Red dot to red dot. Actually, let me see if I can do this with one hand. Not quite. And you want that connection to be quite snug, because if not, the boom is going to wobble a lot. And you also want to make sure that you don't get any debris in the connectors on the ends, because that's going to make your data turn to crap. So we'll just do one more. Like a glove. Now, the thumb screw that we had earlier, which is now sitting in the bottom of the box, can be used to install the GPS mounting tray. That one doesn't need a washer, it's nice and snug as is, not going anywhere. And then you also slide the data logger into its tray. I usually take the stylus and just kind of wrap it around once. I'd rather have it on the tray here than like snagging on a tree branch. You can also stick it underneath. I have no idea how well this is filming. Lastly, in the box there's a couple of options for shoulder straps. So there's one very lightweight shoulder strap and there's one with a bigger padding on it. want this cushion to Velcro on here so that you can carry it with your hip on that side. This thing is really ridiculously long, right? It's almost 4 meters, so it's hard to move around inside the garage. Anyway, before we take it outside, we're going to turn it on here and make sure that everything's set up. Now, the setup is actually very similar to the EM38. The GPS needs to be turned on. Button's easier to push now. It needs to be in operate mode. If your batteries are good, you will see a red light there. Speaking of batteries, let's do a detour. There is this handle you see on one side and a thumb screw on the other. If you loosen this thumb screw, you can pull this tray out. Now, this is a very low-tech tray. Please don't get it wet in the rain. I highly recommend wearing gloves to pull these batteries out because the metal tabs that hold the batteries in can actually cut up your hands if you're not careful. But that's the battery tray. It's low-tech. This design has been in use. The design of the battery tray has been in use for like decades. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The rest of the system's been updated with things like Bluetooth and digital transmission and all that other stuff. But you know, back in the day, there used to be dials here, and you had to like manually read the number off the dial and then write it in a notebook. That's how old that battery tray design comes from. So, assuming that everything is on, both the EM31 and the Bluetooth device, and you fire up your data logger, and of course this is the same data logger we were using a second ago. You can use your fingers if your fingers are free, or the stylus if you're wearing gloves. And now this time we're using the EM31 logging program. And again, like the other one, there's going to be a couple of windows that pop up. It's going to be very similar kind of things that you can configure. The only thing that you might want to change is the update rate, but like probably not. And then you hit logging and wait a second while it initializes itself. And again, you can see that it is receiving satellite. Right now inside my garage, it's got 9 satellites in the position. You can also see connectivity and in phase here. There is no calibration option here, unlike the EM38. The calibration is actually quite a manual process, and it is done according to the steps on the first couple pages of the manual. And the manual is inside the box. And basically, it requires you to go to an area of your survey grid where there is nothing present. So no potential contamination, no pipelines, no anything like that. And you set the device on the ground, and you run through the calibration procedure on the first couple pages. And what that will have you doing is modifying these screws just ever so slightly. Now, when they're screwed in tight, they shouldn't move. And then you'll have to loosen this nut in order to turn. Let's do this. You have to loosen this nut in order to turn this or this. And then afterwards tighten the nut so that your calibration is fixed in place for the duration of your survey. And that is, it's kind of a trivial process, but it's something that people often overlook. They just grab the device and go. I'm not saying that you need to calibrate, but it's best practice to calibrate. I'm going to skip it for the purpose of this demonstration. Now, this is actually hard to see, but this is a shoulder strap, and that pad goes on my hip. Now, I'm going to put it on here with one hand successfully. Now, the device weighs 30 pounds and change. And when you're walking around, you generally want the pole facing forward. And you You don't want to twist it left or right. This allows you to see the screen and everything. It doesn't have to be perfectly horizontal with the ground. There can be some tilt up or down, but generally you want it to be fairly flat. Now, this device, because it's so much larger, averages over such a large volume. And on the screen, we're just going to create a data file. We're going to save it and hit go. So right now, you can see a red and a blue up at the top of the screen. The device has a range switch here. It goes 10, 100, 1000. If all of your data is up at the top of the screen, and your conductivity numbers are pretty high compared to the value on the switch, you should change the value of the switch. What happens is you'll lose a decimal point, but you'll gain, there you go, once it settles down, you'll gain some range. So now we're not going to sort of overload the system because we went up to 1000. We were up at 175. So we can walk around. I have a metal fence here next to me. Let's get close to that metal fence and see what it does. See, as I get close to the metal fence, the data kind of scoots up to the sky. It's because the fence is a conductor. We have some rebar in this concrete. Should make it really noisy. Yeah, you can see the red lines and blue lines are going all over the place. And there's no rebar in this concrete. There's a trailer parked here, so we'll probably see that too because we're close enough. Anything within 5 meters of the device you'll see. But there's some rebar over here again. And as we move off of the nice clean stuff back onto the rebar, we'll see the screen go crazy because the rebar is really screwing things up. Now, I'm probably too close here, and the little piece of metal in the ground here is too small to really be noticed. I just walk right over it like it's not even there. So in open ground, you're going to see fairly smooth curves, and on debris, you're going to see crazy. Yeah. I'm going to turn this off now. Pause. Exit. Confirm exit. Yes. Exit. Now, if you check the file manager at the bottom, and go to your documents folder. You'll see we have two files in there. One has a file name with an N38 and the other one has the R31. These are the raw data files we collected during the course of this video. You can just copy them to a USB file, memory stick, and put them on a computer for processing or send them to someone for processing. Make a map. Okay, I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to turn the Bluetooth GPS off. I'm going to put the device to sleep. And take it apart, put it in the box, and ship it. And I hope this video has been useful. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me. Oh, this is too long for this garage. I'm happy to offer advice or help you troubleshoot or do anything to make your survey go well. Cheers.